My name is Shane, and I'm going to tell you a story that happened to my father. I don't think you've ever heard anything quite like it before. At least, I hope not. It happened a long time ago, and I'm going to tell it from my father's point of view, so you can feel the same way I did when I first heard it. All right, let's begin. 1967. I'm 34 years old, and my life is in ruins. I'm sailing on a ship toward a place where I hope to forget my past and serve my country in some meaningful way. That day, I smoked my last cigarette just before I saw a small island. The ship came to a stop, and one of the sailors prepared a lifeboat for me. He and I rowed together toward the island. We didn't exchange a single word. Sailors aren't the talkative type, and I was in such a state that I didn't want to say anything anyway. When I stepped off onto the old wooden dock, the first thing I noticed was how beautiful the island was. There was some trash by the shore, but the trees, bushes, and green grass set against the rocky cliffs created an incredible view. For the first time in a long while, I actually felt alive. I picked up my suitcase and started walking along the trail. To my right was a massive cliff, but I knew what was on the other side. At the top of a small rocky hill stood an old, modest lighthouse. It made a strong impression on me. It felt like I had stepped into another world, a world I had only imagined before. That was going to be my home for a long time. Or at least, that's what I thought. Not far from the lighthouse was a small, old wooden house. That's where I headed. I was the new lighthouse keeper. The house was dirty and smelled of dampness. It seemed like no one had lived there for a long time. There was a bunk bed, a small table, and a radio that was connected to the lighthouse. There was electricity, or at least, there was supposed to be. There was also a small wood-burning stove and a few shelves and chests for storage. I was supposed to be met by Bill, the other lighthouse keeper, who would get me up to speed. But he wasn't there. He was probably up at the lighthouse doing his job. I decided to unpack my things, and by then it had already gotten dark. Bill still hadn't shown up, and the house was pitch black. I took an old kerosene lamp and stepped outside. The lighthouse was working and looked stunning. It felt like I had forgotten everything that had happened in my life, like I had hit reset in that moment. The lighthouse gave off a strange feeling of loneliness and grandeur. I walked up to the old steel door and tried to open it. With some effort, it finally creaked open and I stepped inside. Hello, is anyone here? Bill, are you here? I'm the new lighthouse keeper, your partner. There was no answer. It was very dark. Good thing I brought the lamp. In front of me was a door leading to the utility room, and to the right of the entrance was a staircase going up, and it looked like there was light up there. So the lighthouse definitely had electricity. But where was Bill? At the top was a small room with a logbook lying on the table. If the outside of the island was a beautiful place that gave a feeling of peace and a slowing of time, then inside the lighthouse it was completely different. Water dripped, something creaked. It was very dark, and it felt like the steel walls were pressing in on me. I felt constant tension from the sound of the working machinery that kept the lighthouse running. I wasn't bothered that Bill didn't meet me. I didn't care, and I wasn't even curious where he had disappeared to on such a small island. All my attention was consumed by the lighthouse once I saw its mechanism up close. The old lamp that needed constant checking. The lighthouse gave light to all the ships passing by at sea, and for me, it gave a reason to keep living. I gave myself that purpose. I stood at the top trying to understand how everything worked, when suddenly the door downstairs slammed shut. Must be Bill. I went down, but didn't see anyone. Very strange. In the darkness, by the light of the kerosene lamp, I started to feel uncomfortable again. The walls seemed to be closing in. I stepped outside and noticed the house was lit. There was a man inside. I walked in and introduced myself. Hello, Bill. I'm your new partner. The man said nothing and walked over to the table. He handed me the keys to the lighthouse and said I could sleep on the bed. You don't stay here overnight? I asked the obvious question. No, Bill replied. I assumed he slept inside the lighthouse. He left, and I was alone again, but now the house had electricity. Bill seemed strange to me, and I realized we weren't going to be friends. On the table, I found some instructions, and after reading them, I learned what kind of work lay ahead of me. I went to bed, and I couldn't sleep the entire first night. I lay on the bed and stared out the window at the lighthouse. In the darkness, the structure looked incredibly sinister, and it was the first time I felt like the lighthouse was somehow watching me. It was a strange feeling, as if the lighthouse were alive. I slept for maybe 40 minutes and got up early in the morning. It was my first sunrise on the island. Absolutely beautiful. During the day, the place looked completely different. It was peaceful and secluded. I got dressed and reread the instructions. I needed to go to the lighthouse and refuel the generator. I walked to the door and opened it. Damn, who are you? It was my overseer, who told me he would come once a month to check if I was still alive. What do you mean if I'm still alive? Why did he think I might die? Wilson, the overseer, would also be the one to deliver fuel to the island and take away the trash. Of course, he wouldn't do it himself, but would send his assistants. I asked him about Bill. Why is he so unfriendly? Wilson told me that once I spent as many years on this island as Bill had, I wouldn't want to talk to people either. After Wilson and his team left the island, I went straight to the lighthouse to refuel the generator. But when I entered the technical area, the generator was already filled. Bill had beaten me to it, but where did he go? At that moment, I didn't even realize how much I had started thinking. Just 2 days ago, I didn't care about anything, but now my mind was full of thoughts and questions. According to the instructions, I had to measure the wind speed and the water temperature. I also needed to observe the water and record whether there were any waves. I did all of that and wrote it down in the logbook. Bill hasn't been keeping the log or doing his duties for a while now, although I can understand why. He was out here completely alone. But why do I also feel like I'm alone here? I recorded all the data in the logbook and went outside to measure the water temperature. I kept wondering, where did Bill disappear to? He's probably somewhere I don't know about. Maybe there's another cabin or a tent on the island. Maybe he's out fishing. That day I walked around the entire island, and you know what? Bill wasn't anywhere. There were no other structures, just the lighthouse and the house. That started to make me uneasy. I went back to the house by lunchtime and chopped some firewood, the kind they bring once a month by boat. I lit a fire in the stove and started cooking. For lunch, I had canned food. I heated it up and had a nice meal. It felt like I was slowly starting to forget my old life. But to make that happen, I needed something to do. So I decided to clean up the house. I grabbed a broom, cleaned up all the dirt, and wiped the floor with a rag. I sorted old things and threw away the trash. All that was left was to clean the table next to the stove. I bent down and scrubbed it hard, trying to get the ingrained dirt off. Whew, that's it. I lifted my head. Damn, again? Bill was standing outside the window, staring at me. I told him I'd come out in a second, just needed to put away the rag and bucket. A couple of minutes later, I went outside to talk to my partner, but he was gone, nowhere in sight. He disappeared again. I was tired of these hide-and-seek games, so I decided to find him. I went to the lighthouse and entered the maintenance room. I was sure he was in there. I opened the door and was immediately hit by a terrible smell. Something rotten. The maintenance room was dirty, dark, and empty. Where the hell was he? I went upstairs and checked the entire lighthouse. No one. Outside, it was starting to get dark. All right, time to head back to the house. My shift was over. As I stepped out of the lighthouse, I heard a strange metallic humming behind me. I turned around and looked at the lighthouse, now no longer lit by the sun. That sound again. It was deeply unsettling. That feeling returned. The lighthouse. It was like it was talking to me. Had I really gone insane in just 2 days? No, time to sleep. I went back inside and went to bed. During the night, I woke up only once and looked out the window. The lighthouse was off. I was supposed to fix it, but for some reason, I couldn't make myself get out of bed. I felt awful. My body just refused to move, and my nose picked up a horrible stench. I don't remember falling asleep again, and in the morning I couldn't tell if that was a dream or reality. The lighthouse was working fine. I spent the whole day doing my usual tasks and didn't see Bill once. 7 more days passed like that. Since then, I hadn't seen Bill. He had simply vanished. I figured he must have jumped off a cliff and that I was completely alone out here. I got used to the solitude and the routine, but I never managed to sleep peacefully. Every night I'd wake up and see the lighthouse. Sometimes it pointed its light at me, sometimes it was off. It didn't matter. It always looked creepy. That feeling only came at night. It wouldn't leave me, and it kept getting stronger. On the 8th day of my new life on the island, I was doing my usual work when I noticed a lamp had burned out. I had to replace it. It was evening, and I got to work. It was easy, until I suddenly heard a door slam downstairs, just like on the first day. I stepped onto the staircase and looked down. No one. I grabbed my gloves and headed down, noticing that the door was slightly open, so I wasn't imagining things. By that point, I was sure I was alone on the island. "Bill, you here?" I went outside and started walking toward the house, and that's when I noticed the lights were on inside. What the hell? I hadn't turned them on. I walked up to the house and stood at the door, but something stopped me, and I decided to look through the window instead. Inside was Bill. He was standing by the table with a rope in one hand, the kind of rope used for the wrong reasons. In his other hand, he held a knife. I didn't go in or make my presence known. I had no idea what to expect from him, but I accidentally stepped on a shard of glass from an old bottle. Bill heard me and walked toward the entrance. I instinctively backed away from the house and hid behind a tree. Bill stepped outside and looked around. Then he walked off toward the lighthouse. Now I knew for sure Bill was alive, and he was heading to the lighthouse. Curiosity was eating me up inside, so I followed him. As I approached the lighthouse, that feeling returned. The lighthouse felt like it was watching me, but this time, it didn't scare me, and I went inside. Of course, it was empty. I wasn't crazy. That couldn't be it. I checked everything and found no sign of Bill. And then, as I stood in the maintenance room downstairs, I heard that strange metallic humming again. I'd heard it before. The sound was coming from below. There was another level down there. I noticed a hatch in the floor and opened it slightly. The stench was unbearable. So that's where Bill had been hiding all this time. He'd just dumped all the work on me while he rested in his secret hideout. That was my first thought, but I didn't go down. Bill had clearly become aggressive and unstable. I decided to report this to the authorities. They were due to arrive in the morning. I returned to the house and got ready for bed, but this time I locked the door, just in case. I lay there on the bed, looking at the lighthouse, and I had the feeling I'd uncovered its secret. I had almost completely forgotten what life was like before I came to this island. I closed my eyes and remembered that Bill had been searching for something in the desk drawer before I saw him. I got up and went over to the desk to see what he was looking for. There were documents and various other papers. The documents were at the very bottom. I opened them and read the name, Bill Myers. When I looked at the photo, my knees went weak. The photo showed a completely different man. He had a different skin color. What the hell? So who was the man at the lighthouse now? Suddenly, the lights in the house went out, and the lighthouse stopped working. It was pitch dark, and I couldn't see a thing. I sat there until morning without closing my eyes. When my supervisor arrived, I told him everything. His reaction struck me as strange. He didn't seem very surprised, but he said he would definitely look into it with his team. He told me to stay in the house in case Bill showed up. When they came back, I found out that Bill was gone for good. They didn't find him. The basement was empty too. But on the cliff, they found a pair of boots and told me that Bill had jumped off during the night. They advised me not to worry. Otherwise, I might lose my job here. What surprised me most was that none of this seemed like a big deal to them. After they left, I thought I'd finally sleep peacefully. But I never did. Not once. A month later, I left the island and realized you don't have to run to the edge of the world to start a new life. Who was that Bill? And who was the real Bill? What happened to them? What is management hiding? Those questions didn't stay in my mind for long. I came to understand that bad things always happen in life, things you just want to forget, and I learned how to forget.